This is such a reductive idea. There's a reason why that meme exists of like trans people walking like Athenian scholars together talking about gender, but then the picture of like talking to cis people is like, you know, a mom playing with her baby. This is turfy as shit. It's just changing where the goalpost is. That's all these people fucking do. They claim they want inclusion and they lie every fucking time. You are incredibly restrained right now. Hi, everyone. So, God, where do I even start? So there is this ongoing thing in the discourse that comes up ever so often. It is about as pervasive and terrible as herpes. And it is just as annoying. That is, it's not really a particularly dangerous or damaging thing to the movement in the sense that, like, having this in any way stops, you know, leftists from being trans supportive. What it does is it acts as gatekeeping and does harm in the sense that it attempts to make divisions in the trans community that just have never been there. People don't like this concept because they don't understand it. So it's either an ignorance or a stupidity issue, or what else often happens is they don't really get what the hell's going on when they talk about gender, and so they conflate a number of things all over the place.
Or there's a fallacy about, like, one group taking resources away from another group when really these are the same group, and the problem of resources falls on capitalism, not on us.
Yeah, it's like we can talk about wanting Medicare for all, but then, like, ignore the fact that the scarcities in medicine are because of, you know, capital, and not because someone with, you know, certain pronouns decided to ask for estrogen. So what the fuck are we talking about? So Hunter Avalon is a well-known gentleman, I'll call him, who basically has had a bit of a interesting time in the public space. Hunter Avalon was originally an alt-writer who basically was big into conservatism and made videos that were very pro-conservative and anti-trans. He was very well known for the longest time for being, again, somebody who made videos that were really gross about trans people. He has come back against that. He had made a video tearing down his own video because essentially he had a debate with Vosh and kind of switched to being a soak dem. Now, granted, still a lib, but not bad. Not bad at all. And he's been, you know, a trans ally, and he's been helpful until this happened. You'll notice in the title the term we used was Hunter's transphobia. And the reason for that is I don't like to differentiate things. I don't like terms like ambiphobia or xenophobia because I think that they differentiate too far. Me and Zena have talked about this before, but this is still transphobia. It doesn't matter whether you're a non-binary trans person, a xenogender trans person, or a binary trans person. It is still transphobia. Call it what it is. We don't say that there's a specific type of racism, at least not in the broad sense for different types of ethnic groups. We just call it racism. And in the same way, this is transphobia. So what Hunter had happened was he lost his goddamn mind online. And I'll show you the two clips that did it. And me and Zena will then sound off about this. And then I'll show you some other interesting content creators who had some thoughts about this. So here goes.
So what makes gender gender? What is gender referring to? Gender, and this is where I'm going to get crucified for this, but I do not care. And if I hear a better argument, I will change my position, okay? But my understanding is that...
Okay, so real quick, before he gets into what he thinks gender is, again, the big cis boy's trying to use his brain noggin. Let's be clear. This is not true. First off, anyone that comes out and says, I'm going to get crucified for this, but I don't care, and I've done it before too, no, you are about to double down. And to me, when Hunter says something to the effect of, when I hear a better argument, I will change my mind, what he's really saying is, nothing is going to change my mind because I will arbitrarily decide that there is no better argument. You can tell because if you look through here and see everyone's reactions, you know, obviously there were some people that had some bad fucking takes. Like, here is Riverboat Jack being based. Love Riverboat Jack. There is Rain, one of our mods and a dear content creator friend who is also making fun of him. Here's mine saying, please don't speak for our community. I am a xenogender trans woman and have far more education on this than you do. As a counselor and a mental health professional, I do not think your opinion matters here. Stop playing the victim and listen to people. He blocked me for this, by the way. He blocked a lot of people over this. So this whole I hear a better thing, that's not what happened. And I want to be clear, he already was debated on this with his wife, and she spanked him. So get to understand the history. When he says he will change his mind, this is a bald-faced lie. I really want to be charitable to Hunter. We tried this. Me and Zena thought about this when we were trying to think about how we've interacted with Hunter in the past. And the reality is like, again, we could only come up with that he seems reasonable at times, but then does shit like this. And I don't know if these are old school reactionary tendencies or what, but let's see what he thinks gender is.
Gender refers to how people perceive themselves and behave and express themselves in regards to what is culturally recognized as being masculine, feminine.
Wrong. He is already incorrect.
Whoops. He went too far there in that definition.
What he is conflating is the difference between gender expression, internal gender identity, and gender roles.
Yep.
I don't give a fuck what society thinks masculine and femininity are, because they are rigid outliers that don't mean shit.
Well, and they're concepts that change all the time throughout history.
And are different between each culture. Yeah.
Yep.
This is why we're not gender abolitionists, what I will get to in a moment. But the reality is why we're not gender abolitionists is because it's inherently a colonialist concept. It is at least from our perspective, the idea is that you're trying to enforce this idea to get rid of gender when gender is deeply woven into the underlying cultural foundations of people's views, and you're conflating two very important things. Roles are not identity. Why we're liberationists and not abolitionists is because we want to liberate people from roles. We want to, at some level, make it so that people have the freedom to play in gender and be able to express themselves as they do. This is my fundamental problem, is that you can have an expression such as, say, oh, good example, Finn. Finn is a cis boy. Finn looks more fuckable than a good number of my female friends. And I'm a giant dyke. So, if that's the case, I'm really attracted to Finster's gender expression. But that's not his gender identity. Do you understand? So already there is a conflation here between these three overlapping things.
On that type of spectrum. And then you have non-binary individuals who, again, are non-binary. Their gender exists as a gender because it is a rejection of the binary of gender. Again, in regards to masculine or feminine. This is why not.
So this is what someone tried to argue with me in DMs about on Discord, and that they were incorrect. I want to make it really clear to you guys. Like, me and ZZ have had very long into the night talks about gender, and I want to be really clear about something. This idea that non-binary is a response to masculine and feminine is only partially correct. It is more a response to the fact that you are not hardlining into one of the pre-existing gender roles that are that are already existing. When we talk about non-binary, what we're really talking about in some ways is something off the map. It's actually the first part to get off-road into gender non-conforming and xenogender behavior. In fact, you could make a really strong argument to make would be that xenogender is just spicy non-binary. But the problem is that because cis people don't understand anything without a binary, what happens is that everything is in response to that binary. That is, either non-binary people are a response or rejection of that binary, thus they are not masculine or feminine, or, and I don't think he's going to say this, but they can be both masculine and feminine. But what he's not taking into consideration here is agender. That's not even a xenogender. This is just agender. The idea that a person has no gender identity whatsoever, or gray gender, which is just ambiguous. I realize that, Arachnoid, but do you understand the point that we're making? Because to say non-binary is an umbrella term actually proves my point, and Zena's as well, in that, by definition, Hunter has no idea what the fuck he's on about. He's using a very large umbrella term to talk about a whole bunch of different things that actually are, again, pushed under this umbrella because they're not binary, trans femme or binary trans masc. But he's saying it's only a rejection of the binary. But you just named several different things. Like, again, there's lots of genders. There's gender fuck, gender fluid, agender, gray gender, bigender. Only some of those interact with the masculine and feminine. This is my problem, is that in a lot of ways, this is such a reductive idea. There's a reason why that meme exists of like trans people walking like Athenian scholars together talking about gender, but then the picture of like talking to cis people is like, a mom playing with her baby. This is why, because this is brainlet maneuvers. All right, let's keep going. I want to get through these because we have a lot of things to cover. Unless you have anything you want to add, my kisses.
Nope. Let's go.
Non-binary people try to present more androgynous.
No, they don't.
That is what gender refers to right now.
That is bullshit.
Gender refers to something, because if somebody says I am tree gender.
So already he has stepped in it. You could use the term NBphobia. I prefer the term just transphobia. So non-binary people try to appear gender ambiguous or androgynous. Can I get hypers in chat that anyone who knows any she, they, femme presenting non-binary people or he, they, masculine presenting non-binary people? Hypers in chat if you have an example of a person who presents masculine or feminine but is non-binary. All right, you guys got to get better combos. What the fuck and Spider Queen, stop interrupting. I love you. MZ Fallen, please type better.
Hypers, oh no.
You guys are killing it. Okay. Remember that you tried. The thought is what counted. Remember, emotes are always in capitals. You guys killed it. Anyway, I love you all. It was worth a shot. Anyway, back to this. He's wrong.
And I say, why are you tree gender? What is different between being tree gender and then just having an interest or being, something you're into? Like, is the car mechanic car gender? No, interests, personality, hobbies are different from gender. But if they're different, then gender has to mean something.
But it does. So, oh my God, I feel like I'm talking at a child. Okay, so here's the thing. He's right on this. Interests and preferences are not gender.
They are, in fact, their own things.
That's true. We have tests that measure personality traits to see what kind of jobs you could fit into or what ways you behave, but they have nothing to do with gender, though some of those personality tests do have gender biases in them. If someone says they're tree gender, you can either come at this as bad faith or good faith. Hunter is acting in bad faith. To me, he is coming from an inherently transphobic perspective, because rather than take the person at their word that this is their gender experience, what he is doing is immediately assuming they're lying. He can say it's them conflating an interest, or they should use a nickname, or any of the other bullshit terms people use for xenogenders. He's saying they are lying. And often they say this because it's the same thing fucking true scum say all the time about wanting attention. So I want to show you something that me and ZZ came up with. So ZZ and I had a long talk about this. And so ZZ's part of this. I posted it on my personal because for a while it was really hard to access our other one. I want to read this real quick because this will outline xenogenders very quickly. Let's talk xenogenders. I define gender as a self-emergent schema. What that means is that there is some sort of experience related to one's sense of self that is specifically aspected to the construct of gender. I define that construct as a part of the self in relationship to things such as presentation, sexuality sometimes, and relationship to the body. I subscribe to this notion because it takes into account of something most gender theory does not. Why is it a child as young as 3 can know they are not their assigned gender at birth? My argument is a priori of any social programming. 3-year-olds would be very rudimentary as far as their level of gender roles. As far as the child would understand them, there's a sort of knowledge that is the person knows about their own identity, even a priori to social programming. The only thing that social programming does is give them a sense of what those things mean.
Yeah.
Oh, you play with Barbies? That's a girl thing. but I still like playing with Barbies, right? And how one relates or doesn't relate to certain things we associate with gender. This is why an AMAB kid can instinctively want to play with Barbies or want to do girly things, even if she doesn't understand what it means to be a girl. Taking this further, when someone does the necessary amount of self-reflection, sometimes the answer they get back is not boy or girl. They may not get back anything, or they may get back a vague impression related to something they are aware of that resonates or is a good metaphor for what they are pointing at. These are Xenogenders. No one is suggesting that they are a tree or a demon. Not really. But there is something about their gender experience that is entirely off-road, and so they have to use the best language they can to understand and explain that experience. The reason I separate out gender roles is that I think that they are meaningless and subject to change based on culture. They are social prescriptions that seem to force people into certain ways of being based on very arbitrary standards. They also are incredibly ineffective in the discussion of non-binary and xenogender people because we do not have social roles for those things. This is why Contra, parentheses, rightly fucking so, said that NBs can't pass as there's nothing to pass as. The same would be true for Xenogenders. So already in this one thing, Zena and I have blown Hunter out of the water. With a span of what, like 8 tweets, 9 tweets? Everything he's said up until now has been utterly disproven by this, by someone with far more education and knowledge. Because the reality is that his argument causes divisions in the trans community and hurts us as a political bloc. Because whether you are xenogender, non-binary, or binary, you still use the same resources and you still have the same political interests. And so the issue we get into is that when you look at this, him saying that non-binary people pass as androgyny immediately shows me that he has a child's knowledge of gender. So when a person says to me they're tree gender, what do I take that as? If I said that to Zena, I'm tree gender, what would that mean based on what we just talked about?
That there's some kind of experience that you are relating with this.
Yeah, that there's some way in which I am engaging with gender, that when I go in there and I go to search, I don't see a boy or a girl, nor do I see an androgynous person like he projects. What I see is plant life, a tree. Maybe I'll see an image from an old movie that I really liked, like Fern Gully or something. And rather than try to fit that ham-fisted into, say, masculine or feminine, or androgyny, because he's still confused about that, the issue is I then use something else.
Well, and at the very least, I think it'd be safe to assume that like this is a very, very strong like internal, association for you, right? Like there's a lot of weight to this. Because typically when we're talking about gender, no, that's a pretty significant thing that's in our sense of self.
Yeah. So let's finish what he's saying and keep tearing it apart, and then I want to briefly go into why we differentiate gender roles and gender expression and gender internal gender self sense. Because this is where the difference between us, say, for example, are not gender abolitionists, why we come down on the idea of gender liberation, because gender abolition comes to some very weird conclusions unless you move the goalpost. So let's see what he has to say.
Then gender must be talking about something.
It is. An internal sense.
And then you'll have people that say, well, I want to abolish gender, so I want to say that everything's gender now. That'll just destroy the word completely, because now gender will be everything. Then now you've taken away gender from having any explanatory power, which I think is going to be at least detrimental in the short run.
I agree with that idea. This is why I don't like gender abolitionism and why Zena and I are kind of against it, because, well, not because of an explanatory reason, because he's doing this weird, like we have to explain ourselves to cis people, but more for the sake that I think the idea being is that I think that gender is an internal part of the self, and thus to try to get rid of it, one, is a fool's errand, because usually what these abolitionists say is they want to change the name to something else because they're being derogatory, or, and again, it just doesn't have any utility.
Well, and when we look at like the self schema and how that builds over time, there does seem to be a way in which everybody still has a gender experience of some kind, right? And so we can't just like eliminate that, because that seems to be something that is just their part of the self. But frankly, we have already run into some of the issues with assigning meaning in the way that Hunter mentions, because clearly like this hard line between men and women didn't work. Okay, it left us with a society where like a good chunk of people now just don't have basic adult skills and need those. And we are having a hard time figuring out how to actually address it, because everybody's still allergic to the idea of like home ec still, right? Because it used to be massively gendered, and frankly, everybody needs those skills. So we're still kind of in a weird place, breaking some of the stuff down.
No, you're absolutely right. But also notice that even society started breaking down the gender roles, because while yes, they've been very resistant to allowing men to appear feminine, because again, the whole term of the F slur and the way we engage with that. Because again, if a man is presenting effeminately, he must be engaging in some kind of kink or derogatory, degeneracy. But with women, look at the advent of things like with feminism and the creation of, like, say, the tomboy or masculine presenting women. While they absolutely do get shit, there's a way that society's been a little bit less, actually, I'll use the term, allergic to that idea. So even within conventional society, there has been shifts in these ideas that have broken the binary. Again, I don't think Hunter knows what he's talking about here, but I agree with the notion of why I don't like gender abolitionism.
Second of all, you're doing this the hard way. Why are you now going to try and validate Xenogenders, which is more or less people that just want to be special and try to carve themselves out as being unique and different, at the cost of unironically delegitimizing trans people who are currently fighting for their rights? I know.
Wait a minute.
Go ahead, Gizzes.
Is he going to talk about how I'm delegitimizing other trans people by having a xenogender?
Citation needed. Citation needed.
Is he going to tell me about how I'm doing that? Because, I can't just have multiple identities, right? Like, I absolutely identify with colors. Always has been. I don't know why throughout... I don't, have one specific reason in my life for why that's a thing, but it always has been. Right? If I go in and I ask myself, and I have on numerous occasions since I was quite young, why I don't quite fit in with men or women, I don't have always good answers. But colors? No. Like, fitting in with bright colors? That feels very much in my experience, or like, especially as part of how I imagine the world, right? Like, in my mind's eye, like, the images that come up are usually like colors or feelings associated with the stuff. But again, I'm not taking resources from other trans people and delegitimizing it, because my identity doesn't delegitimize somebody else's identity. Me having this internal experience doesn't mean that somebody else's internal experience is invalid now.
Yeah, again, so the delegitimizing argument always feels very shitty to me, because it always comes off as this idea that, like, again, there's the resource question, which these people always bring up, but then there's also this really weird way in which they kind of go, well, it'll make it delegitimized in regards to, the way other people think. And again, I this is my response, like, every single fucking time. Do not make me tap the sign. Xenogender people and people who use neopronouns are not the reason why the trans community isn't accepted. Transphobes are. Ostracizing people in our own community does far more damage to us than their existence ever could do. Meaning that, again, this idea that xenogender people are somehow going to invalidate us, we're already invalidated. The existence of binary trans people already breaks gender.
Yep. Well, and when you're a xenogender person and you're going to, like, the doctor's office or you're seeing a counselor, like, every person should have access to those resources, right? Like, that's not delegitimizing anything. Right? My doctor's probably going to look at me and go, okay, well, how do I help you? What do I do for you? But you know what? Everybody's going to get those questions too.
No, absolutely. We're going to talk about this in another segment when we go over the traits of the puritanical progressivist. But one of the things I want to be really clear about this is that one of the major aspects is pseudo-intellectualism and pseudo-morality. So the reason he's saying, I don't like xenogenders because they make me uncomfy and I don't understand them. And so I'm going to appeal to the idea that these somehow do harm. Let's see if he can actually demonstrate that.
I know that sounds like a conservative argument, and it can be used in bad faith.
It is.
But in this regards, I don't need to deal right now with people on Twitter that are saying, you're transphobic if you don't recognize me as being vampire gender. Furthermore, what is gender? It is about your self-perception and your behaviors in regards to what is masculine and feminine. So you cannot perceive yourself as a tree. There is no legitimate perception one can have themselves of being a tree. You can theorize what it would be like to be a tree, but you cannot actually have that internal experience the same way.
Yeah, and I can theorize what it's like to be a girl, but I never was born as one. What the fuck are you on about?
I feel like this.
Wait, that's an utterly transphobic argument. Do you guys hear that? If I change out the language, this is utterly transphobic because it comes down to essentially, you can conceive of what that is, but you're not a tree. To which again, I wasn't born AFAB. So you can't see, this is the male socialization argument again. It's just the male socialization argument with extra steps. This is turfy as shit. It's just changing where the goalpost is. That's all these people fucking do. They claim they want inclusion, and they lie. Every fucking time. Let's finish these up. We got another one of these.
Hey, we do, or the same way that trans people do in regards to gender. They don't have that same internal perception. And then people might say,
please don't defend me.
Finally, when a trans woman says they are a woman, they are a woman. If somebody says, I'm tree gender, you are not a tree, because a tree is not referring to a socially constructed.
Okay, but woman is still a socially constructed concept anyways.
But like, tree is too.
So is tree, yeah.
Words are not, okay, guys, I hate to say this, words are not like objective things. They don't exist somewhere out in nature, and we found them on magic tablets that told us what their definitions were. They're socially constructed ideas. You motherfucker, what is a chair? This is the most deranged argument.
We gotta lower the yelling.
Sorry,
No, I get it. It's frustrating because I'm like, what are we doing here? Also, it's okay to be creative. Like, I feel like there's a lack of creativity going on right now with Hunter. Like,
constructed gender identity the same way that woman or man is. So it doesn't make sense. It doesn't add up at all. And I don't think that my position here is super fucking intense and crazy. Now, it might be to some dipshits on Twitter, and that's fine.
No, not to just some dipshit on Twitter. A woman with a master's degree in counseling, a bachelor's degree in psychology, and a associate's degree in philosophy. You are objectively and clinically wrong. Like I've said in multiple places online before, you blocked me like a coward.
But for the most part, what I'm saying here completely
Also, the whole dipshits on Twitter thing, I got it really clear. What is this, 2014? Are we doing the Tumblr arguments again? It's just some dumb kids on Tumblr. What does their opinions mean? What? Why are we doing that to potential allies, people that will someday vote? Dipshits on Twitter. Wasn't that the shit you were saying about trans people not like 8 years ago?
Yeah.
It's like you moved the line further to the left, but you're still doing the same reactionary behavior, Hunter. You've improved, but your behavior around the improving has not actually shifted. You're acting like a reactionary. You're acting so butthurt and upset because people didn't immediately think you were like, they didn't immediately post the meme. How could you say something so true and yet so correct, so controversial yet so true? Like, fuck off. No one's gonna fucking clap.
Encompasses the validity of trans people and the validity of non-binary people, while also recognizing that gender cannot simultaneously be nothing and everything while you want to abolish gender. And you're...
I agree. So instead, gender is an internal self-sense by which I identify myself in relation to the construct of gender itself, and by definition, that then affects my expression, and then fuck gender roles because you people actually want to control us. That's what that comes down to. I know I'm sounding like really anarchist right now, but this is something that's been, me and Zena have been boiling on for 3 fucking days, is this idea that, like, this notion that you are somehow in any way, shape, or form obligated by society to present it their only way. The only way they have to make you do that is coercion. Yeah, how does xenogender harm trans people, Hunter? I need you to show me on the doll how xenogender people hurt me.
Right. Ben Shapiro's wife identifies as a doctor. That's a good point. So what separates an identity in line with your career as opposed to a gender identity? What makes it different?
One is gender. One is your career that you went to and got an education for, like the one I have that's much higher than yours.
Yeah,
I really don't like throwing around expertise like this, but he sounds like a fucking or psychology 101 child. This is the type of person that would walk in if I had my doctorate and I was literally teaching a fucking college class. And actually, with my master's, I can go teach a college class as an adjunct at a fucking community college. I could have a fucking psychology 101 person walk in that says dipshitted stuff like this. So yeah, the difference being is one is expertise, which is usually centered around some trade skill or ability or through expertise gained through school. And the other one is your gender, which is a combination of three separate things. One of them are control mechanisms that are usually controlled via force or coercion. Those are gender roles. Expression, which is how you present. Expression. And your internal gender sense. That is, what is it you experience? Because the problem is he hasn't come up with a better idea as to what those people are experiencing. He's coming from the perspective that they're acting immediately in bad faith. So I ask you, if you don't like the idea of xenogenders, fine. But here's what you need to do. Here's what every one of you little transphobic shits has to do. You have to, by definition, tell me what those people are experiencing. And you have to do so in good faith. That means they are experiencing something. How would you describe that if not through xenogenders? Because I guarantee you, other people that are smarter than you have already figured this out and used the best language they possibly can. Because at the end of the day, a xenogender is a metaphor based on an unknown in that particular experience of self. And this isn't even bringing in 10 years of fucking Zen and self-experience and self-reflection. Well, this guy was literally making videos that were anti-trans. I was sitting in Zendos getting hit by fucking bald men to learn how to sit straight and actually focus and reflect on my sense of self. I find this entire argument absolutely repugnant.
Yeah.
You are incredibly restrained right now.
Oh, I just want him to stop talking so I can talk about how important narratives are to people and like how that's not a bad thing.
Well, people exist in narratives, and by definition...
Yeah. No. Those narratives can be incredibly important, and especially in the queer community, where many of us got cut off from our history, either because that was never taught to us, that part was silenced, or people died in the AIDS crisis, right? Like, all sorts of numbers of reasons. A lot of us got cut off from that. And when you're in a society that only has, like, two really weird options for your gender roles, and those roles, like, decide your whole life, all right? Like, no, really, for a long time, like, you as a woman could be a teacher, a nurse, or a secretary. That was it. Like, seriously, what the shit? Like, do I want to do any of those things? No. Fuck, even in my college career, I still go to all of my tech classes. I was one of the only, like, AFAB people there, and I'm non-binary even, so, like, what do we even do? Poppy in her classes, right, for counseling, still, like, a trans person, but also, like, AMAB appearing at the time, and, like, the only one, right? Like, so we're both smaller numbers, right? And so these silly rules didn't do anything for us in the first place. So yeah, of course we're going to go find other ways to, like, deal with our experience of our sense of self, because if we don't fit into the other things in the world, well, again, narratives are important to us. The stories we pass down, the stories we tell each other are hugely important to us. Humans need that stuff. That is part of just our natural, like, sense of connection.
And being xenogender is essentially using metaphor as a way to tell the narrative about your sense of self without pigeonholing you into a particular fucking part of the binary or non-binary and being vague as shit. Well, that works for some people. It doesn't work for everyone. I also want to bring something up real quick. Another part of this where he hasn't actually demonstrated the harm. Again, we're going to come to offense versus harm later in the stream, but be very clear. His method does harm in the sense that it keeps people from actually being able to self-identify, which is against what current trans beliefs are. We believe in self-identification. And on top of that, he has not demonstrated that harm, but he's also not really demonstrated in any way, shape, or form if this is a widespread thing. Because let's be very clear, how many people are xenogender? Because I know many people who will either declare themselves non-binary or binary trans when they are in public because they don't want to have to go through an hour-long dissertation explaining their gender. So I want to understand how these people are doing harm, and I want to know the percentages population-wise to actually tell me if this is so widespread that it's going to hurt the trans movement, because xenogender people have existed for fuck all, and guess what? It hasn't hurt shit yet.
Well, and when I've seen data, a lot of times people who use neopronouns also have other pronouns that they use. A lot of us, by and large, do have multiple sets of pronouns for different situations. We understand that the world's not always easy, that not every person we're going to come into contact with is going to have time to learn a whole new thing about gender and pronouns. So we do the best we can.
Yeah, let's finish this up, because I want to be done with him.
If you're going to answer that question, you need to have an understanding of what gender refers to. When
we already did.
I say, I identify as a doctor, that means that you have a career and a profession, essentially validates your...
What he's doing is conflation. This is called a false equivocation.
Profession as a doctor. But if I say, I'm a woman, I'm a man, I'm non-binary, that's how I identify. What?
By the way, all of the arguments he's using can be used against non-binary people too. It's just where you arbitrarily set the goalpost. Our belief is the value of inclusion. So we include as xenogender people because there's no harm that they're doing in any way, shape, or form. He is conflating profession and gender because it is useful for his own attempt to make this sound absurd because he doesn't like the people that are arguing with him. And now he's also going into this bizarre thing where if you take all of his arguments and just copy pasta them correctly, it's no different than Calvin Garrow was with non-binary people.
True.
What does that mean? It means that's referring to your internal perception and identity of yourself in regards to masculinity, femininity,
or outside of it. You haven't demonstrated that. In fact, everybody ignores fucking agender people because it's convenient.
Or a rejection of both.
Okay. So I don't use the R slur, but God, do I want to. So let's see what some other people that are content creators that we enjoy or are friends with. My dear son said this. Xenogenders have an inherent link to the concept of neurodiversity. Continuing to push against it further stigmatizes transness and neurodiversity. Gender is informed by our experiences as much as our identity. We have been in this debate since the 1850s. Based, son.
Yeah.
Based in xenogender, metaphor pilled, Mixed Dizzy always delivers, fuck Hunter. So, Mixed Dizzy, very wonderful any all, or pronouns question mark, messy ace gender queer thing. Mixed Dizzy's awesome. And so this is what Dizzy said with Hunter. Woke scolding is when you call a trans ally transphobic for not respecting your gender identity as a bottle of mint mouthwash. Nobody interacting with you identifies that way, so it does kind of feel like you're just throwing out a transphobic straw man instead of listening to non-binary people describe the way that some of us articulate gender using metaphors that reach beyond a binary. If you can't understand why a trans girl with a penis who tops might identify with vampire gender, that's a lack of literacy and imagination on your part. Google Carmilla. The link between vampires and queer sexuality is plain if you actually read up on it. Hunter. If I hear an argument better, I'll change my mind.
Yeah.
Vivian Wolf. I'm a trans ally. Actually, you attack helicopter. Never trust any cis person who declares themselves to be an ally, especially when the only time they make that declaration is to deflect from accusations of transphobia. True. Another wonderful from Mixed Dizzy.
All the xenogender discourse is reminding me of the commonality I've noticed of the werewolf as a transmass symbol. The werewolf has been a symbol for AFAB puberty before, like in the horror film Ginger Snaps, with the lunar cycle metaphorically representing menstruation. And that carries over into a symbol for transmasculinity. Trans people are often fond of shape-shifting in fantasy stories because it reflects our desire to change our own bodies, and the mystique and power of the werewolf fits well with the transmass struggle. Wolves can Canids in general are often coded as masculine, so the transformation of a feeble human into a powerful wolf provides a sense of escapism for trans folks. I've known trans guys before who call their monthly menses werewolf time to relieve period dysphoria. The werewolf being a beast that comes suddenly from within you where it didn't exist before and overpowers you beyond your control is also reminiscent of how puberty feels as a trans mask. These violent, painful changes you didn't ask for that fill you with wrath and rage. There's something very cathartic about the werewolf for me personally, and it's why werewolves show up a lot in my writing/art. When I'm pressed to explain how I express my queerness through fiction, I talk about werewolves, and I've written trans mask were monsters before. I've never felt a desire to identify myself as werewolf gender, but the affinity I feel between my own queerness and werewolves is why Xenogenders makes so much sense to me. There's depth and metaphor here that expresses ideas we simply don't have language for otherwise. This is also why I characterize anti-Xenogender folks as illiterate bores. I'm autistic and can grasp metaphor. What's your excuse? You could all stand to consume some more essays about media, written or video, or just fucking browse TV tropes once in a while. You'd learn something.
Okay.
Damn.
And let me make sure this... Oh, yeah. So, of course, I was like, I fucking love this so much. Here's my response. Werewolves in the Middle Ages. Fear me, human, for I am fear itself. Gen Z werewolves. I'm baby. Blah, 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 blah.
This is so cute.
And then this is how I feel about werewolves. This is my werewolf.
I'm Poppy's werewolf. Just saying.
Turfs and Truscum sound awfully similar in conversation. Never before has a fucking has a sentence spelled it out so fucking quickly. So here's my issue. Hunter's arguments make no sense and come from a place of bigotry. They come from a place of he claims trying to validate trans identities, but what he's doing is invalidating them. And then he's getting pats on the back from people like Gammy and various other like trans binary people who are pick-me's, individuals who want to suck up in any way they possibly can to get as much, attaboys from cis people as possible so that they're the last one pushed in the mass grave. At the end of the day, queerness is always in response to the rest of society. Well, yes, we can change society to make it more queer. The reality is that we are always in, to some degree, opposition. Our existence, whether binary, non-binary, or xenogender, is always going to make people really uncomfortable.
Because it makes them ask a lot bigger questions than what they're usually prepared for.
Why do you think Republicans want to get rid of all forms of representation, including teachers talking about things in schools? Because they know if you know about the existence of trans people or gay people, guess what? You might consider that you might be one. It's why Zoomers tend to have much higher percentages of trans and gay people than, say, millennials, who are much higher than Gen Xers, and Gen Xers were much higher than boomers.
Mm-hmm. Well, and if we can self-determine more about ourselves, we can make better choices. And, that doesn't really help the Republican Party, does it?
Yeah, this is the last thing I want to end on is just kind of a really quick review of like our ideas of me and Zena worked on this. Zena actually really helped with the last part a lot. Why we're not gender abolitionists. And the reason I bring this up is because for some reason Hunter brought this up again. In our early parts of our channel, me and Zena were basically under the idea that like using neopronouns and xenogenders was a means to an end as far as trying to crush sort of gender roles under the absurdity. We don't believe that anymore. They are an end in and of themselves. But this is why we don't believe in gender abolitionism. And I know it irritates certain people, but I really want to be clear why I don't like this, why Zena doesn't like this. We've covered this on stream before. So I will read this to the best of my voice. I may have Zena jump in at some point. So this is what based Holic Master asked. I guess my question is, doesn't gender abolition or liberation lead to the same outcome? To explore identity beyond the current view and allow us to seek identities that are wholly our own. From my limited knowledge of the subject, I don't see the distinction, but I could be wrong. Fucking love Holic Master. My answer is no with a very shady caveat. Let me see if I can explain. Gender abolition at its core is trying to get rid of gender. All of it. Period. This is core to the philosophy. This is problematic for two reasons. The first is that they do not differentiate internal gender identity from gender roles because they often conflate the two, which buys into the continued supposed connection. I dislike this because it feels like a take down the master with the master's tools situation. Second is because this idea is incredibly based on colonialism, namely that the idea that we as a world could ever make this happen is predicated on the notion that other cultures would accept this. They would not. So you would either fail or have to use coercion. Here's our video on gender abolitionism. You want to read this next part?
My caveat is that gender abolitionists like to do some weird shit with the goalpost. Namely, when pushed on the notion that getting rid of gender entirely is a colonialist action and would require essentially murdering a part of the self, they move the goalpost to gender roles. I love Voosh, but he does this too, and it infuriates me. The reason is that they are essentially conceding to my argument without the good graces of acknowledging the concession. If you wish to get rid of roles, you are a liberationist. But if you wish to get rid of gender identity and expression, you have demonstrated a profound lack of understanding of psychology and an understanding of the construct we call the self. This is why I call gender a self-emergent schema, because schema theory better describes the way gender is experienced by trans people and denotes it as a part of the self-experience rather than as one, silly chatter argued, a personality trait, or even worse, as something to get rid of. There is a richness in exploring one's gender when free from societal shackles. But to experience that freedom, you need to dump the bathwater, not the goddamn baby. That dirty-ass water is the roles, expectations, and limitations built into gender. Thus, why ZZ and I describe gender as play, because when the chains are off, the fun begins. Side note, notice that for TERFs, to fake an argument, they have to recouple gender and biology. Have you ever asked why? It is because they have no leg to stand on in a gender liberation framework. So they either become gender essentialists or gender abolitionist. The latter is a smokescreen to get rid of trans people. Thus why I argue against gender abolition, because it would always lead to an anti-trans outcome, because it firmly reifies the gender/biology connection due to its mistaken premise. Thanks to ZZ to point out that last part.
So, and then Holic Master did a nice summary of the situation.
So let me just summarize so that I understand what you meant. Gender abolitionism is no bueno because the coercion and colonial implications that would be involved in that implementation.
This next one.
Yeah. You fall into liberation because gender identity is an emergent property. Thus, even if we did abolish gender or something like it, or even if we did abolish gender, something like it would take its place. And it would be called something else, but it would function just as such. Mm-hmm. And this is where Poppy goes. This is also where I sense a dodge from the abolition camp, because when you bring up that gender is not just sociological, they want to rename it something else. So, and then, yeah, Holic Master finishes up. That's why it's more productive to liberate gender identity, because we would be happier to explore than to just recreate something that would otherwise be the same thing and forced upon Western powers most likely. And Poppy responds, yes, well said.
So this whole fucking thread, like, I'm not even gonna toot my horn, I actually genuinely think that this thread, no argument, is probably like me and ZZ's like massive anti-gender abolitionist thesis, and I'm really fucking happy with it.
Well, and I really do want to tie a couple of other things in. Part of my background is in education. I started that degree before I switched over to tech. And so when we talk about child psych, the thing with kids is that the way that they learn especially is play. That is literally it. Every time, you know, you are doing some silly game or some fun thing or any kind of play, they're learning. They're learning from that experience, right? And I think as adults, we tend to forget just how powerful that is, right? Because when we say play with gender, no, we really do mean that we are learning and growing through that exploration, right? Like that play is just creative expression and growth happening there. And that's why Xenogenders are so powerful for us, is that they give us that way to continue looking at ourselves in some way.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's be very clear. Are xenogender and neopronoun things difficult to learn sometimes? Yeah, because they're very individualistic. But with effort, they are relatively easy to do. Often, people who are unwilling to do so are either have very real reasons. Neurodivergent people sometimes struggle. But in often cases, the bigger issue is that it's just someone being an absolute shit. I
was going to say, our neurotypical people struggle too, so...
and so the issue being is that unless there's a very real reason the person is, struggling, then it really just comes down to look at their arguments and what the outcome of what their argument is. I don't trust any argument, and neither does Zizi, about the idea in which you are going to create fragments in the trans community. Gender nonconforming people who has overlap with like Therians and all these other things. You know what? In many cases, I don't understand them. But if I have a client come along who does have these traits, I try to understand them. There have been things in my life that have a regular kind of appearance, and that is I usually have a very strong response to certain groups. And what I've learned is when I genuinely want to say that's bullshit, 9 times out of 10, I'm that thing. There was a point in my life, in my 20s, where I thought trans people were bullshit because I had doubled down on fucking monogamy with a cis woman and trying to be in marriage and trying to do the kid thing, and it all blew up in my fucking face. You look back at very early videos explaining my background. But the reality is that at some point I had to realize, all those times I liked wearing skirts and making out with my male friends pretending to be a girl, look, I'm fucking trans. Then I realized that trans femme didn't quite fit because there were other parts of me. And initially, I just used fey fair pronouns to make sense of that. There's a whole video on that, too. That argument's in there, by the way, still based. And explains the entire narrative thing. Since then, I experienced my internal sense of self more in a demonic format, which is why I generally refer to myself as succubian. Do I genuinely think I'm actually like a succubus? No. But do I feel like the mythos around that thing makes sense to how I experience myself, my gender, and my sexuality? Yes. Because the reality is that for me, as a person who is borderline and has a tendency to be hypersexual, and also has a tendency, and also was a victim of CSA and various other things like that, the way that describes on, say, the Mogwai Wiki or whatever, fits me. Do I think that this is necessarily like a useful term on a grand scale? No, but for me, it makes sense. And so the issue is that, okay, now I'm xenogender. This happened with being plural, too. And I know some of you don't know what that is. Not going to talk about it. But the thing is, when we started having plural people come into our server, same thing. I had a reaction to them. I started asking questions, and I started trying to figure it out. And then what I did is I started playing with plural kit and trying to figure out what it meant. And lo and behold, I now have a diagnosis of DID. I don't think everybody has my experience. I don't think everyone who's reacting has my experience. What I'm trying to tell you is that I think people need to reflect on their reasons why they have these reactions. There's some reason why Hunter reacted this way. Now, I'm not Hunter's therapist. I don't care. He's a big boy with a weird mustache. He can actually 100% handle this himself. I do think it's interesting, though, that the screenshot, if I remember correctly, for his anti-xenogender video, I think is the old picture he used to use for his conservative days. I could be wrong on that, but that's what I thought I saw. I can double check. But the point being is, why is it... I want to ask all the people who are anti-xenogender, if you don't believe us at this point, let me ask you, do you have a better theory? And no, you can't say bad faith things like, they just want attention, because attention's fine on this channel. Fuck yourself. Mm-hmm. They're just insane. No, because that becomes a recursive loop that can then include non-binary people and trans people and trans-binary people. You stupid idiot. You need to, in good faith, give me a better reason why they have this metaphor to explain their gender. Human beings have lots of experiences we have in our bodies and our minds that we just don't have language around. We construct language to try to make sense of it as best we can. It's not always perfect, It's not always clean, but it's the best we can do. So if you really want to challenge Xenogenders, you have to demonstrate a better theory as to what they are.
That, and if you really, like, ask yourself this too. Just taking somebody on good faith, what does that actually, like, lead to? Like, just taking somebody on good faith, oh gosh, you got to know somebody. They communicated something to you about their sense of self, right? Like, they shared something about themselves with you. That's where we're going with this, when we actually just start accepting people on being good faith for that kind of thing. So,
absolutely. Well, with that, guys, I hope that made sense. I'm sorry we were so angry during this. I've been holding on to this for a fucking week because we've been sick. And I'll be honest, thank you, Holic Master, for the interactions on this. It was actually a really good conversation. All the people that interacted with the original Xenogender thread was really great. I really do get a lot of good stuff from this community and trying to figure this stuff out when I'm online. And it really does mean a lot because Zena interacts with the Discord way more than I do and gets a lot of stuff out of that. Like, we really do appreciate you guys because you guys make our arguments better. So... Yeah. With that said, I hope Hunter changes his mind. If he doesn't, he can fuck himself. But regardless, we'll see you in the next video. All right? Hey, everyone. Thank you so much for watching. If you could like, comment, and subscribe, we'd really appreciate it. If you want to support the channel further, you could go to patreon.com/XenonPoppy, and you could become a patron for as low as $3. If you want to support us further, you could donate below with a super thanks comment, or you could, in fact, even go to our website, which is currently transgrowtherapist.org. You can go there and either donate directly, or you can even get a subscription and get a cool colored name in chat next time we stream. Anyway, thank you again.